Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, social marketers around the world. My name is Win Morgan, and as president of the International Social Marketing Association, it is both my privilege and pleasure to introduce the 25th in a series of webinars designed to advance social marketing teaching, research, and practice. I'm here today with Jay Kassir, our moderator and organizer of the webinar series, as well as chair of the ISMA membership committee of our board of directors. Jay, how are you?
Oh, doing well, thank you, Win. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Hey, that's Jay there, and that's me. And we'll begin in just a minute, but before we do, I'd like to share some timely updates provided through the International Social Marketing Association. I hope to see you all at the World Social Marketing Conference, May 16th and 17th. I hope to see you before then and after then, as well as there's going to be, as you know, some great seminars or workshops going on before and after the World Social Marketing Conference. So we're going to be there, and I hope you are as well. And remember that we have an event calendar if you want to know what's going on in the world of social marketing or what's of interest to people in the world of social marketing. Just go to i-socialmarketing.org and click on our events calendar. And also remember that we have a job board, and you can take a look at that by going to i-socialmarketing.org and clicking on our job board. Employers, are you trying to recruit people for social marketing? You can send an email to us at win@i-socialmarketing.org, and we'll send you a coupon for up to 5 free job announcements. If you're looking for a job, make sure to upload your resume to the job board. Now, I'd like to turn over the webinar to our moderator, Jay Kassir. Jay?
Thank you, Win, and welcome, everyone. Let me see. Do we have a poll here next or not? Or are we going to go straight to, I think I will go straight to introducing our speaker today, Biju Dominic, who is the second speaker so far to have a second ISMA webinar. It's a real pleasure to have you back with us, Biju. Biju is the CEO of Final Mile Consulting. He pioneered the development of what's called behavior architecture by combining learning from the fields of cognitive neuroscience, behavioral economics, and design. Combining his passion for behavioral sciences and organizational behavior, Biju spearheads the organizational behavior change practice at Final Mile. He is a regular columnist in leading newspapers like the Times of India, Economic Times, Mint, Business Standard, and has been quoted in BBC, CNBC, Boston Globe, Business Week, Forbes India, and others. Biju has delivered lectures at the London School of Economics, Chicago Booth Business School, Indian Institute of Management, Railway Staff College, and so on. And Mint newspaper profiled him as part of the new think tank of India. It's a real pleasure to welcome you back. Biju, over to you.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Win. Thank you for the introduction. Welcome to those my listening from U.S. Good morning to everyone there. Good afternoon to those in Europe, and good evening to those listening from Asia. Okay, I'm going to speak about new tools to solve tough behavior problems. And I know every listener in this webinar obviously is working on different social issues, and we know that most of them are extremely tough behavior problems. Final Mile is a 10-year-old organization, and over the last 10 years, like all of you, we also have been working on quite a few social problems. For example, in Bombay, one of the largest cause of death is people cross the railway tracks and they get hit by the train. About 10 to 12 people die every day as they cross the railway tracks. We were asked to see what could be done to reduce those accidents. One of the biggest problems in India and a lot of the developing countries is people defecate in the open. And this is happening despite a very large number of toilets being built. So despite toilets being built, people don't use those toilets. They go and defecate in the open. Maternal health and child health is a significantly serious social and so a behavioral problem. We work in those particular areas. I know road accidents is something which it's a very serious issue in India. About 150,000 people die in India every year on road accidents. So what could be done to reduce road accidents? Financial inclusion. So I'm sure these are all problems where many of you listening into this webinar too could be working on. So the obvious question would be, what sets Final Mile's approach to solving these problems? And what is Final Mile's new approach to dealing with this particular problem? And I think the fundamental difference is that we decided to use a new set of sciences to actually deal with human behavior problems. So we take a lot of learnings from cognitive neuroscience, behavioral economics, and we take that and combine that with our understanding of design, and we so develop new interventions to deal with these social issues. But why did we go for a new science? Because there is, of course, the traditional knowledge of human behavior, which we have obviously developed it based on our understanding from classical economics, and a lot of the multiple psychology theories. And based on these sciences, I think there is an understanding that we have. And the understanding we have is that the man is basically conscious of what we do. So we are aware of what we do. And so, for example, and along with it, mostly with our learnings from classical economics, we believe, the traditional belief is that man is a rational human being. So our market research technique, a lot of the other marketing techniques are based on this understanding. And so the marketing and the advertising fraternity have used this science and said, okay, if I have to get someone not to cross the railway track, just tell them not to cross the railway track. And because man is a rational human being and he knows that dying is not too good thing that to get into, he will not indulge in that particular behavior. And all our signages are in that particular direction. Or at best, assume he doesn't listen to that. We say, okay, just tell him about the consequences of that. So if you just tell him that smoking can cause death, and just show a dead man lying there, and we believe that obviously cognitive dissonance and other theories has step in, and we believe the behavior has changed. But I'm sure since all of you have worked on a whole lot of social issues, and one of the things that we saw as we work on a host of social issues is that people are aware of the problem. People are aware of the consequences of that particular problem. So anyone who crosses the railway track or anyone who drives his car at 90 miles or 100 miles per hour knows that he is doing something which he should be doing. And he knows the consequence of it. He says, I might get into an accident. So awareness is not an issue. So which means, I think what we have is that somewhere due to some reason, that awareness is not leading into action. And we all know about that. And because of that, I think a lot of us have started questioning is action and attitude change is equal to behavior change, or is there another way? And so Final Mile said, maybe the traditional way is there, but there could be. Is there a new way of looking at it which could be more effective than our traditional approach of dealing with human behavior and trying to change it? So when we looked at this particular science, it involved almost creating a knowledge-based organization where a lot of reading and a lot of lessons is really involved, and we did that. But I think one of the things we did was, even when behavioral economics and some of them came in, what we initially found was there was almost a straight application. Okay, here is a heuristic principle. Okay, let's apply it over here. But we said we need to sort of go a bit more deeper, and I think then analyze and arrive at what we call a new knowledge. At Final Mile, I think there are about 4 pillars on which all that we do is actually resting upon. And one is this particular information that is coming from cognitive neuroscience, that more than 99% of human behavior is driven by the non-conscious processes in the brain. That's huge. When we traditionally believed that it is mostly we are conscious, now we are saying that consciousness is a very, very, very small part of our human brain's processing. The second is mostly work by Antonio Damasio and Joseph Ledoux of New York University, I think, again, neuroscientists, that this distinction that we had until now between emotions and rationality, they said, doesn't really exist. That emotional parts of the brain are involved in all decisions, which basically almost says that there is nothing called a rational decision. All decisions involve the emotional parts of the brain. And so one of the things at Final Mile we do is that in all projects, what we try to do is to get a very deep grip of the emotions that are involved in that particular decision-making process. Third is, of course, coming in from behavioral economics, which says there are a lot of shortcuts, heuristics that we do, and the understanding of those shortcuts would be brilliant. And so we go a lot to understand those particular shortcuts. And the fourth is, we know from this one that the behavior is driven a lot and affected a lot by the context in which the behavior is happening. So in all the processes we do, and you'll see that later, research, communication, media strategy, we don't move far from the context. For that matter, we try to get deeper and deeper into the context in which the behavior is happening there. But for us, one that sort of sets apart this one is what we call the most significant discovery about human behavior. And for us, that significant discovery is that until now, the center of the human behavior universe was this conscious, rational man. And with this new knowledge coming in from cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics, we strongly believe that the center of the human behavior universe has changed. And it's predominantly a non-conscious, irrational, emotional center is what we are now seeing to be at the center of the human behavior universe. And the consciousness is a very, very small part of it. And we believe this discovery could be even bigger in terms of significance than the discovery that Galileo told us about, was that Earth is no more the center of the universe. So to us, this is a very significant thing. And later when you see our processes, we'll see how this significant discovery about human behavior has affected our work. But not only that we use this new knowledge, we went on to create new processes. And based on it, we went on to develop a new research methodology. We obviously have created new strategic frameworks. We have just created a new communication strategy, a more designed strategy has been created. And obviously, like most of the other projects, we also definitely test that again control and then verify before we moving in. So let's come into how have we used this science. When we said, yes, we have used new tools, I just want to talk about 2 of them. And one is the tool, as I said, is something that we developed, which is a new research methodology. Because if we believe that more than 99% of our behavior is non-conscious, and our consciousness has very little access, or for that matter, no access to that particular behavior. And I think work by Benjamin Libet showed, for example, that the consciousness comes to know about a decision a few milliseconds after the non-conscious has already taken a decision, which means many a time when we are asking people, why did you do what you did, he's telling us certain things, but that's more of rationalization after the behavior has happened. So obviously researching and understanding that non-conscious, for which we don't have a conscious access, then becomes a very tough job. So how do we deal with it? Straight away we knew that traditional research methodologies like focus groups that we use a lot, or even questionnaire methods where people fill up questionnaires, are not too effective in trying to, because we are using that only to scratch the surface of the consciousness. At Final Mile, we went on to develop a new research methodology called Ethno Lab, where we take a lot of the strengths of ethnography, where we sort of dive deep into the context. We got to sort of go and live in that particular context. But a lot of projects like road accidents or railway track, maybe we could actually have do a typical ethnography. But when it came to say some of our projects like girl trafficking, where we are trying to study both the supply and the demand, it was very, very personal, we realized that it's very difficult. Or in some of our commercial projects that involve financial services, where the decisions are taken over weeks and months and maybe years, it is not easy for us to do a typical ethnography. So based on this understanding, these constraints, we realized that yes, if we can actually include gamification, which is a computer-based games could be developed, which is obviously developed in completely, the storylines are all very much in the context of the problem, and we get people to play those particular games. They play games, they win prizes and go, but while doing that, they're giving away a lot of non-conscious and deeper insights, which otherwise they wouldn't have disclosed. So some of them are experimentative, and in a lot of them what we do is to sort of not just see how the decisions are made, but we look for preference reversals. We test it because it's a very, we can actually sort of intervention-led research, and this is like a live intervention where we were trying to see what could get people to use toilets, and we were trying to see, and I'll talk about the solution later, but we said, okay, let's try it out. Or this was where we were working for a large CPG company, world leader, who was testing a detergent, but the lady is sitting there, doesn't know. My colleague on the left is just looking at them because they've been told this is a washing competition between three of you. They get into the competition, but I think what we were observing was how they were using the detergent. This is something we did for where a client was trying to see how we can move people from personal transportation to mass transportation. Again, you can see them sort of playing the games on the computers or on the screens. So this is a sort of a gamification, and we've done this across different sectors. And I think the validity or the fact that this is a very good research methodology came in when the 2015 Dublin SOMAR, or 2016 Tokyo SOMAR, and the 2016 New Orleans SOMAR. The most outstanding case study was the case studies of Final Mile. That's when the market research fraternity said getting into the non-conscious is very, very important, and this new technique is doing that job very well. And the heartening thing was the one that we done in Dublin was for this particular problem where we were asked to study what are the barriers to male circumcision, because Gates Foundation they found that if the males undergo a circumcision, even if they have a sexual relationship with an AIDS-positive woman, his chances of getting AIDS actually is down by 60%, which means as a tool that is far more effective than even trying to get condoms, because that's a daily habit, whereas this is a one-off and once in a while get it done. But the biggest issue is what are the barriers, and understanding those barriers as to why people don't want to undergo circumcision, despite knowing all the benefits of it. Or the one that we won the award in 2016 was for understanding this very complex problem, very sad problem, where a lot of girls are trafficked. And we had to study both the supply side. What are the factors? What are the things that are sort of pushes the parents into their girl to get into that? Do they really know what's happening? What could be done to sort of prevent it? That's on the supply side. On the demand side, why do men go for paid sex? Obviously, a very personal question, but I think using Ethno Lab as a technique, I think we managed to get very deep into it, into that particular problem and get some very deep insights. So one is we've assumed, now we've understood what the research methodology, and we've gone deep into insights. The other interesting tool that we developed using this new science was a new design process itself. So obviously there is human-centric design, which is all about there is an existing behavior and how do we create a product which really fits into that. Most of the projects final mile desk, and I know as service marketers, the projects that we all do is to get people to move from one behavior to another behavior. One of the things with our understanding of the non-conscious, we said, if I have to change behaviors, there's no point in speaking much to that very small conscious part of the human brain. If we really have to get them to move, we need to, obviously, brain is the organ of human behavior, and if more than 99% of that organ is at a non-conscious level, then we need to find a research design methodology that sort of reaches out to that 99%. And so we developed a design process called Design for the Non-Conscious. So this is a process where we develop designs that influences behavior intentionally in such a way that the actor is not consciously aware of the connection between the stimulus, which is the design artifact, and the behavioral shift. So this is not subliminal advertising where people don't see or people hear it at an auditory level which is lower than the frequency that our ears can sort of consciously detect. No, it is not. Here when you see some of the examples that we've done, people can see the artifacts right in front of them, but they have no idea how that is actually affecting their behaviors. But the truth is, it is actually affecting their behaviors. So it is a very powerful way because there is no conscious interaction between the stimuli and the behavior change. So the whole behavior change is happening without they even being aware of it. I'm taking this very large issue of road accidents. Now, I'm just bringing in this particular thing to just show that any project we have when we have looked at it, our slides look like these, where we realize that it's a very complex one because we don't believe that any human behavior problem is sort of a USB paste. It is a simple one problem, and then you have a USB solution, and then you solve it. We looked at the problem as to why road accidents happen, and it's a very complex problem. One of them we realized the people who get into accidents are people who travel on that particular road several times over. These are truck drivers or car drivers who drive on that particular road several times over. Something else that we realized is these roads are fairly empty, and when they're empty, there is not much of cognitive load on your brain. You get into a certain monotony, and monotony reduces your attention, ability to be attentive, and more so to make certain sudden changes in your style. Or a lot of new roads in India are really good roads where you can sort of really go really at very high speeds. But obviously the rules have restricted and said, you shouldn't be driving at that. So obviously there's a conflict between what the roads are and or there is on the anonymity. One of the things we're realizing is that we tend to look at behaviors by looking at the face of someone else, and that mostly happens on face-to-face transactions. But when you're driving even at 20 miles per hour, you don't really see the emotions on the other person's face. He becomes sort of an object. And so your interaction between, and in India, a lot of people do jaywalking and so pedestrians, so that interaction is completely lost. Or there's the pedestrians, as I said, a lot of them do cross Indian roads at random places. They have a very poor judgment. Not individually. The brains have a poor judgment in terms of judging the speed of the oncoming vehicles. Or it could be overall because a lot of people do not really follow traffic rules there because overall executions of some of those rules are fairly poor, at least in some parts of the country. So overall, it's a complex thing. There are too many factors that sort of gets in as to why this particular problem is happening. But how do we solve it? For example, one of the factors that we realized is there are these places where the road opens where people can actually take a turn to the other side, and we call it the median openings. And those we realize from the data is where a lot of those accidents happen. So one of the things my team realized is that if we can get the people to be a bit cautious as they arrive at the median opening, and in that process get them to reduce the speed at which they're coming in, I think we might be able to reduce the accidents at those median openings. But how do we get the people to reduce the speed? Now, we realize from our ethnographic studies and other studies that people do not judge speed at which they're driving, and they regulate the speed by looking at the speedometer. They judge the speed at which they're driving by looking at how things are going past them back towards them, and using that particular insight, we said, as the people is about 250 meters before the median opening, there are these perpendicular to the road lines are drawn. But what the drivers do not know is that as they're coming closer, I think the distance between the lines actually have been made lesser and lesser. So as the driver is going, suddenly he realizes the white lines are coming towards him at a much faster, going past him at a much faster rate than before. And without he even being consciously aware, his leg moves from the accelerator to the brake. And our studies on the speed realize that people reduce the speed by about 18 to 20% at the median openings. Or we said right now the signage systems across the world is mostly a singular element of communication, and mostly that's in words. Danger or a certain speed limit is written there. One of the things we realized in our face-to-face transactions is the power of mirror neurons. And one of the things we wanted to communicate was, when people are traveling and doing an activity again and again and again, the feeling of risk attached with even the most riskier of the behavior actually becomes less and less and less. And one of the things that really happens is, and that whole area of risk compensation is there, where finally there's no risk attached at all to it. And one of the things we realized is that we need to give little injections of fear once in a while at places where accidents could possibly happen. And that could come from the signage systems. And those injections of fear is nothing but emotion of fear being transferred, is best done through mirror neurons. And in face-to-face transactions, mirror neurons pick the emotions on the person standing opposite me and then pick the particular emotions. And in the absence of a person being on the road, we said the best thing that could happen is that photographs. So we said, let there be photographs on the signages. And obviously these signages are also in repetition, because repetition always works. And some of the most powerful signages, the slogans, this one are always in three. And there is that whole power of three where the brain is most used to from a communication point of view. And these signages were used across the highways. Or at certain other places, at turnings where we wanted to bring in the traditional solution, that we to put some speed breakers, which obviously the government didn't want because that affects the very purpose of building good roads. But the design team came up with these lines which almost comes against you. Now, it creates that little eerie feeling across there, but it just forces that person to move his leg from the accelerator to the brake. These were first implemented 2 years back in one of the highways in India near a city called Hyderabad, which some of you might have heard of. And this is a 70-kilometer stretch. We introduced these solutions over 1 year, and then we observed the results over the previous 1 year. I think we found that the fatal accidents have come down by a whopping 56%. And the total accidents came down by 43%. In India, where road accidents are costing the country about 2.5 to 2.8% of the GDP, and this is a substantial contribution to the growth of the country. The other one, the factor was a project that we worked on. I did mention that before in girl trafficking. One of the insights that we picked up was the person who's involved in trafficking actually thrives in an area of where not much information is there. For that matter, he kills any sort of information. Many times he tells the parents of the girl, don't tell anyone that I'm giving her a job in the city because someone else will come and steal that particular job. So we wanted to break that environment of no information, and we suggested to the NGO, the organization that came to us and said, let there be a helpline. But let not that helpline be on girl trafficking. Let that helpline be on migration to city, which is a very common practice in rural India. In search of jobs, they do migrate. And I think one of the most heartening things is within a matter of 6 months, there were about 5,245 calls that came into this particular help center. And about 300 of them were calls thanking them for providing information which actually proved useful for them, and which really allowed that information flow to happen within the villages. Or another project that we worked on was where there was a very large insurance company where the salesmen were involved in a lot of mis-selling. They give a lot of wrong information and then they mis-sell in order to sort of do a quick sale and then move on. But how do we inculcate integrity in them, and how do we make sure that these employees are honest and they don't sort of cheat the customers? So one of the things we did was it's a brilliant paper by Professor Aylett of Chicago Booth, which said that if we can get the people to sort of discuss the temptations they face, and then get them to sort of cross those, and this happens in a Hindu tradition where we have this of taking the evil spirits onto sort of a vegetable and then throwing that vegetable out of the house. That's exactly the purification ritual that happens. And in a lot of our projects, we actually try to create rituals. Because we realize that this cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics, much before Final Mile started using it, has been used by organized religion a fair bit. And this was something that we took from the organized religion of creating rituals. And I think what we found is the results were overall very, very good. We looked at it from the terminations that really happened post, and 82% of the teams, I think the terminations were reduced. In the case of about 62% reduction in warnings, and there were 65% reduction in cautions. Or let me talk about another problem. As I said before, a lot of toilets were used when they were built by the government, but they were not using it. So when we asked them, and in our Ethno Lab, they came and said, when I'm sitting outside in the field and defecating there, I can do it in a very short time. But sometimes when I sit in the toilet, it takes me a very long time to do that act. We could have dismissed it as a very stupid, but when you look through the lens of neuroscience, we realize that when we sit in a dark place, the passage of time is very slow. And he was seeing that when he's sitting in a toilet, he's taking a long time is because the toilet was very dark. So what the team did was, the design team said, now knowing this particular insight from neuroscience, we said, how do we get light in? Because electricity is rare in quite a few villages, or even if it's available, it's not available 24 hours, at least in few of the villages in India. So the best solution was cut a little window there. And to bring in privacy, get a little curtain that shows the light coming in. Or also we said, if you improve the relatability of that particular place, it could improve. Earlier, the toilets looked like the one on the right, which is all white, and it looked sort of. But the moment we told them to paint the toilets in the same color as their house, and also get them to write their name outside the toilet, and also get them to put few of those plans and just beautify that particular place, we realized the overall relationship they had with that particular place dramatically improved. And that, in turn, led to an increased usage of the toilets. This is a problem which we did in India for tuberculosis. We did in France, UK, and US on Parkinson's disease, where you prescribe a medication, but the patient doesn't finish the medication. Somewhere so medical non-adherence is a huge, big issue. So one of the ways we said we could actually improve and tell them, normally when people take the medication and they have, the symptoms, at least the physical symptoms sort of reduce, most of them stop taking the medication. So towards the end, they don't. But how do we give them a feeling that the medication, even towards the end, is more and more important? And one of the solutions that we developed was the color coding of the pack. It actually become darker and darker, and even the medicines we suggested should actually become darker and darker. So if you see all these solutions, you will realize that a lot of people do not know. There's nothing which tells them to do certain things. There are no words. There are no sort of exhortations that are written in different languages asking them to do things. But it's all allowed. It's all with the deeper knowledge of how these colors, or just the gradation of colors, or just the light coming in, how it affects. Those understanding has just led the design team at Final Mile to develop those interventions. And people say, okay, there is a window. What does it do to me? I have no idea. So suddenly I'm using the toilets, but he might definitely not really relate to the fact that there is, I'm using the toilets more often because there's a window. Maybe yes, but most of the time no. Or there are those white lines on the road. What are those lines for? They might not even get bothered, but without they being aware of it, they have actually changed the behaviors. One other thing we realized, I know in all these problems I showed only one or maybe two interventions I showed. But as you saw in our work we've done in road accidents, every problem that we work, and I know since all of you work on different social issues, we know that every social issue is a complex social problem. And because it's a complex problem, I think in all our interventions, I think we always look for what we call a system of solutions are possibly created. And non-conscious design is there almost in all of them. So I think overall, I just want to end it by saying, yes, I think all of us are working towards making the world a better place. But over the last 10 years, what we have realized is that this usage of cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics can actually help create interventions which are actually superior to some of using our traditional solutions. And I think we realized that these sciences also are allowing us to sort of write certain new rules about how to change human behavior, because the non-conscious is so large, we need to have research methodologies that sort of allow us to dwell deep into the non-conscious and not just depend upon just some responses from the conscious. Second is, if non-conscious is so large and big, we need a design and a communication strategy that sort of influences the non-conscious and not so much people being aware at conscious and then saying, yeah, I've changed my attitude. Or three, there's new understanding that emotions are integral to all decisions, actually then makes us take a much deeper understanding of how emotions and sort of the neurobiology of emotions and try to then generate emotions and action potentials and a whole lot of factors. I'm not getting any of them, but there is a fair bit of work in that area, but I use that in the development of our interventions. And fourth is, Final Mile is almost convinced that if we have to change behaviors, we have to be at the point of action. Mass media communication is not something that we have developed, and neither will we ever be interested in developing. All the work that we have done so far, you can see that we get into using different mediums, or we develop mediums to reach to the point of action. And what we realized over the last 10 years is the traditional belief that attitudes would change behaviors We are saying change behaviors, obviously at a non-conscious level, and then later you can ask them, and I'm sure their attitudes would have possibly changed. So these new approaches is really helping us to look things in a different way. It's a new road, and we've been traveling on this road for the last 10 years. I think we are finding this road to be very interesting and giving some very effective solutions to some of the toughest behavioral problems across the world. We used this science for problems obviously in India, Africa, Europe, US, and I think it's working across geographies, across sectors. Not just developmental sectors, but financial services, airlines, CPGs, healthcare, insurance. It's working across sectors. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Biju. And I see a number of questions have come in already for you, so we'll go straight to them. For those of you who have other questions, go ahead and put them in. I think we will have time for a few more still. So the first up was from Virginia Williams, who would like to know how ethics come into play with the approach you're taking. And particularly, or specifically, she says, in the research of this unconscious behavior, are there ethical issues? For instance, the women washing competition, or the toilet game where the woman was using it in front of men as an audience.
Now, specifically about the audience, no. I think it was our own lady colleague who was actually with them. The lady on the left is our colleague. But I think I know she's asking about a much larger issue of the ethical issues about it. I think even when we work in the United States and in Europe, we actually follow all the rules that are required about that. They know they're coming for a market research. Obviously, the cover story, we don't tell them what category it is, but we tell them it is, but it's a game that they play. But I think we obviously are aware of all the rules, and I think we haven't yet found more, anything as far as the research is concerned. I thought the question would actually be more on the design part of it, where we are actually influencing the behavior non-consciously. And one of the things Final Mile stand has been that, one, the non-conscious is a biological reality. And I think we need to find a way to communicate to the non-conscious. Obviously, what Final Mile did was we took certain ethical calls right in the beginning as the creators of this particular science, that we will not work on certain categories like cigarettes and liquor. And we are very happy to sit with, and we work with the governments and others. Any discussions on these, we are definitely would love to be part of this to set even more rules if required to do that, because I completely agree that this being a very powerful tool could be used, and I can tell you today it's being used by a lot of wrong people, and most of them are doing it because of their intuitive wisdom, but as I said, organized religion and others have been doing it. But now that we are the first organization to bring it on mainstream, we have taken certain rules like not working on certain categories, but I think I'd love to hear comments from professions like you to see what more could be done to make sure that this is not misused. But the fact is that non-conscious is a biological reality, and in order to be effective, we need to speak to the large non-conscious is important. Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize, I'm sure you all know him. I think when he was asked this question, he said, it's a call between efficiency and ineffectiveness, being effective and being ineffective. And he said, I will go with being effective.
Thank you. When you were talking about the road accidents, you talked about the behavioral challenges. Ryan Holm would like to know, how did you determine what those challenges were? What sort of research did you do?
The roads were typical ethnography. So what we did was a lot of the pedestrian behaviors we observed by almost standing and observing what they were up to. we observed and studied the behaviors of the drivers by almost taking, in India it's very common to take, a ride and request for a ride as we go along there, hitchhike a ride. We request to ask us to get dropped over there. But I think what we are doing is actually observing their behaviors as to how they drive. So it was a lot of work was observational research.
Okay, thank you. Ryan,
go
ahead.
One more just addition. We also had a lot of data from our client in terms of what sort of accidents, what time the accidents, what sort of vehicles are involved, what is the nature of accidents. All those were, also became a huge input into analyzing the causes of those accidents.
Good, thanks. And if you have any more questions, Ryan's group, on that, more specific, just ask and we'll try to clarify that for you. Thank you. Question from Kelly Dennings. She says, I think this info is spot on and useful. How do social marketers use this approach? How do we partner with neuroscience experts?
I think we have to assume that I think the last few years there are different institutes and universities, definitely in the US and in UK, offering courses, and I hire from there. Just beside me is a lady who comes from a University College London. It's got an excellent set of courses from there. Some of the, obviously the Harvard and Stanfords of the world have definitely started speaking. Definitely hiring them in, and then it's actually, to me, has proved extremely useful. And I think those neuroscientists actually have a very good understanding of human behavior, which people like us who do not know that, don't really have. So it's really worthwhile looking through human behavior through the lens of neuroscience. For example, I mentioned emotions, and suddenly you realize, I know emotions have been sort of used by the advertising industry, from 1950s, if not maybe before. But when you look through same emotions through the lens of neuroscience, you take on a much different, very actionable approach to emotions. And I don't have time to explain it, but I can recommend books that give you very good understanding of emotions from a perspective of neuroscience. And we have found that becomes really useful in using the appropriate emotion in our communication. Maybe I can just give one example. Many times we speak about guilt and shame, and we might say, what's so much of a difference? There is something called action tendency. Every emotion creates an action. And when the action tendency of guilt is that let me take a corrective action. But if you create shame in that particular person, when you are feeling ashamed, you always withdraw to yourself. The action tendency is almost internal, and there is no an outward corrective action that is actually taken. So it's so subtle. Are you creating guilt over there? Are you creating shame over there? And based on it is where you get an action, or you don't get no action. Those nuances, neuroscience now teaches us a lot.
Thank you. I'm going to combine a question from Virginia Williams and Doug McKenzie Moore. So you've given us the impacts of your work to reduce road accidents. You had dramatic impacts with your methodology. And then you've shown us some other applications. Let's start with the application which was to do with trafficking girls. And the question was, so we talked about the hotline. You've got more people getting the information. You said that was one of the barriers, this lack of information that they had. And so you're getting through that barrier. But the question is, how does that directly affect or prevent the trafficking of girls? And did you measure any impacts for that and for any of the other ones that you showed us?
In the girl trafficking one, the implementation is still on, because there are certain other communication also, like the good father communication. It's all coming in together. It just started. All that I'm speaking about, it started in the last 3 to 4 months is where, I think 6 months is over, is where the results have started coming into the initial part of it. But I think girl trafficking, in order to get the numbers of how many less girls are trafficked, is going to take a long time because it's not going to be that easy to spot. But there could be a lot of other subtle trends that I was speaking about where people are calling up. And our belief is that when some of those things happen, numbers should possibly happen, but it's a bit difficult to judge. Same is the problem with we've faced with toilet usage. We looked at, we went and inspected toilets in terms of earlier we know there was a lot of dust and, many times they stored grains inside. But suddenly when we did this one, we found there was water. I mean, there someone was using it. But are all the 4 members of the toilet using it? It's very difficult to create any measuring mechanisms for it. So many times we are forced to use what we call secondary indicators to say that the usage has slightly gone up. So we are facing problems across on that. On the TB, we have done a few testing in there, but we haven't got because we're waiting for the government to give us a larger approval to actually test that on a larger scale. But on the same color coding part of it, I did see an article in the Wall Street Journal about 6 to 8 months back, if I'm right, where 2 professors from South Korea has actually tested that, and they have found that the color coding and changing the color codings actually has an impact on patients' attitude to medicine.
Interesting. Okay. We have 2 questions from Tina Dickinson that I'll put together. You mentioned that Final Mile isn't interested in mass media, but do you think that mass media, which can be focused on tapping into emotions, can play a complementary role to these point-of-action interventions? And do you think that taking a multi-channel approach would be more effective than a point-of-action alone approach?
I think Tina is completely right. I think wherever a complementary role has to be played, like in the girl trafficking one, there is mass media being created. There's no doubt about it. But I think at times when we create a new movement, there are certain beliefs that we need to sort of inculcate. And one of the things we said is let the ad agency take some of our insights and develop the mass media that's required. Most of the awareness is very low. I think mass media is the best solution, the best medium to actually reach out to people. But we still believe that once awareness reaches a certain threshold levels, I think that the communication has to go more and more to the point of action, because there is this whole area called decay of memory, and that the Hebinger's curve in neuroscience shows that that's a huge decline, and within few hours people completely forget. So in order to preserve the memory and the action together, point of action has to become a much bigger focus than mass media. I can also tell you that mass media is very easy to create, take, and then reel it out to reach us out. Point of action communication development and implementation of that is a very tough job, but it's worthwhile to focus and invest in that.
Thank you. You're talking to largely a group of social marketers. One of us has asked the question, do you consider yourself a social marketer? Now, we're not saying exclusively a social marketer, but do you consider yourself a social marketer?
At Final Mile, I think ask any employee what gives them the biggest kick as they walk into the office every day is because they said they're working on a project which is making the society or the world a better place to live in. But one of the things we realized is that, especially when I had to hire all of them from the best universities in the world, I need to pay them good salaries. And I need to make money to pay them good salaries. And the developmental sector doesn't give me that. So what I do is that, of course, I work in commercial sector, and we charge a fair bit to do that. A lot of our developmental work are done at a much more subsidized rate, and some of them are pro bono. And we do that. We are able to do that because we are making money on our commercial projects. We don't get any grants from governments. We don't get none of those. So this is a business model, and it's working very well. And so we get the good talent. They're very happy to work on these projects. At the same time, they know the importance of working on commercial projects. So it's a good little mix, and I think it's working very well.
Okay, well, thank you. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut questions there because we're at the time where we're just about to, we don't like to go over time, and we've only got so much time left. So thank you very much, Biju, for another great presentation. And thanks to all of the participants in today's webinar as well. When you leave the webinar, you should be offered the opportunity to fill out a short evaluation form, and we depend on your answers when developing our thank you, Win, our upcoming webinar. So even if you've done it before, we would appreciate knowing how this webinar went for you. So please let us know. It's a pretty short quiz for you. And do remember that our next webinar in this series is Socio-Psychological Levers for Improving Women's Health and Well-Being with Joy Parkinson from Australia. Is that what this one here is going to say? Yes, there we go. So we're going to skip to July from now because we've got the World Social Marketing Conference in the middle. So we don't have this one's been a little early, and the next one will be in July with Joy Parkinson. Registration should be up by later today. And finally, thanks to Win, who's helped make these webinars an important part of ISMA's member offerings. Win, back to you.
Thanks, Jay. And it's always been a pleasure to be part of the webinar. It was a great webinar today. And, you make it seem easy, but I know that you spend a lot of time organizing the program, and I want you to know that we really do appreciate the time you're taking, Jay. Thanks so much for all you're doing for social marketing. And Biju, hey, thanks for your presentation on cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics. I saw that some of the people studied this and they majored in this in college, and they were very excited. And we've gotten great feedback on your first presentation, and this was just as good. And it was wonderful to have you. You know, Biju, I think we can have you back for a third presentation. I think this is your second one in the series, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we look forward to inviting you back for a third one. Thanks so much. Hey, look, and to our members, I wanted to thank you for being your continued support and your participation. We hope to see you at our next webinar in July, Socio-Psychological Levers for Improving Women's Health and Well-Being, with our good friend Joy Parkinson in Australia. And until then, keep visiting the ISMA website, share your events on our calendar, exchange resources, check out our Career Center. And from Jay and I, again, thank you very much. We hope that those of you who will be coming, we'll see you in May at the World Social Marketing Conference. And until then, this is the International Social Marketing Association. We now conclude today's webinar.